Good morning, everybody. I love the energy in the room, and I feel a little guilty for asking for more time, but I have three things I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about, first, the challenge we all face around limited resources, and then I want to talk about some of the new skills I think we're going to need, and if we have time, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the new infrastructure I think we're going to need. So the first thing I want to just note is there's never going to be enough money, and I just want to use this to focus you. So if you look at the total amount of money that governments around the world spend on technology, it's about, sorry, I don't know, can we go back one slide? I'm going to move really quickly, so you got to move quickly with me. Go back one slide, there we go. We spend globally, about $700 billion a year on technology by national governments in the world. But if you dig into that number, the overwhelming majority of that money, like the vast majority of that money, next slide please, the vast majority of that money is spent by mature governments. So Western Europe, North America, mature Asia, that's Australia, and then I threw China in there just to be fun. But basically, $600 billion of that is spent by them. That leaves only $81 billion for the rest of the world. That includes you. That's the rest of the world. And if you dig closer to that number, if you kind of like break that out, and then you kind of said, well, what's that mean per person? I need to do a next slide. You're going to have to really move quickly. I have a lot of slides. I need to go to the next slide. There we go. Thank you. Let me go back a slide. There we go. Okay, this is the slide. No. There we go. It spends about $14 per person versus $252 per person is being spent. So just want you to first know how the discrepancy is being spent. And then if you wanted to make the amount of money we spend on these people the same amount we spend on those people, we'd have to go find, globally, $1.4 trillion every year to spend. In the middle of a climate crisis, in the middle of a bunch of other things, we're probably not going to find $1.4 trillion. It's the first thing, it's the really sobering message I want to communicate to you all. And what gets worse is, I need to go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you, stop here. So what's worse is, if you look at the kind of wealthy countries and how they're doing, it's not that good. Like, I don't think anyone's sitting here being like, yes, what we really, really want is the digital government that Germany has. Or we really like the digital government that Canada has. Like, no one's looking at those countries and saying, yes, that is the model, and that's what we're looking for. Because if you dig into those countries, when they run a technology project, about 64% of the time, that technology project either goes over budget, doesn't deliver the value we want, fails outright, and like 20% of those projects fail completely. This is like as if we build highways, and 20% of the time we build highways, the highway just collapses, everybody dies. And the government's kind of just like, yeah, that's just the way it is. Like, this is kind of normal, like that just happens. This is our current state. And I don't think that's the state that we're particularly interested in replicating. I need you to go to the, thank you. And so, if you look at the success rate inside government technology projects, it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still terrible. Like, it's still terrible. And I don't want you to think that this is the goal. That replicating this is what you should be aspiring to. And so I want you to be careful about who you're looking to as your models. Because many of the wealthiest countries in the world are not a model for you. And you should not be trying to replicate them. You can accept EU money, but just be careful about who in the EU you choose to replicate. Okay, next slide please. So the thing I've been kind of obsessed about in part is two sides. One is, what are the new skills that we're going to need? And the other is, what's the new infrastructure we're going to need? So we're going to need a digital mindset inside government. This is clear to me. And sorry, next slide. Thank you. The way I want to think about technology is, I don't want you to think of it as some tool that you're going to go use on people. There's a wonderful story David Foster Wallace tells about two fish swimming along, and as they're swimming along, this big fish starts swimming towards them, and as the big fish passes the two small fish, it turns to them and says, "Hey boys, how's the water today?" And the two small fish keep swimming, and after like 5 minutes, one of the small fish turns to the other small fish and goes, "What's water?" This is the challenge that you face right now, which is that technology is not a tool, it's not a thing. It's the water that you are now immersed in. And when I teach, I usually find 3 types of people. There are people who don't know they're in water and are struggling. There's people who know they're in water and would like to learn how to swim better and not drown. And there's people who know they're in water and would like to swim better. And it doesn't matter which of those 3 you are, the first and most important thing you just need to realize is that the technology is the water that's all around you. And so it's not so much about what skill, like what tool are you going to use, it's about what you're going to do in the medium that you exist. And this became clear to everybody in government in the middle of COVID, where if you send all your citizens home and say they have to shelter in place, now you're like, well, how do I deliver the services? And how do my employees work? And how do we communicate? And how do we work on documents together? All of that now becomes the world in which you live. This is challenging for government. Because if you look historically at how government has worked, there's kind of this long, glorious history. I can go to the next slide, please. This long, glorious history. Next one as well, please. Thank you. A long, glorious history of government where we have government for like almost 4,000 years. And for a huge period of that time, we started to use paper. And paper was amazing. Paper gave us memory. We could now do things over time, didn't have to all sit in your head. But you have to understand that like technology, like digital technologies in government, we've really only had since the 1950s, if then. That's when the first computers were used to like do census. And then all of those computing power was really used for back office automation. So paying people's checks, figuring out like, you know, who gets assigned to what department. Nothing that was facing citizens. And you have to recall, we've only had websites that citizens actually transact on since 2005, 2010. I mean, there were government websites before then, don't get me wrong, but all they had were press releases. You didn't actually do anything on them. There's just a picture of the minister smiling. And that was like about it. So this is so new for us. It's so new. It's still new for us. And you have to understand there's all this history. So the kind of thing I want to drive home about this is the way we think about government and the way we organize government is like the piece of paper is still like it's still like this is the unit of information that we use to manage government. Even today. If you don't believe me, like just go to your websites and like ask yourself how many places is there a PDF form that you're supposed to be downloading in order to complete a service? And it's because like this, it may be digital, but it's still, a piece of paper is still the unit of information. I remember I loved being in Singapore when I was talking to a public servant who was basically like, they wanted to add a question to the tax form, and they basically said no, but like right now, all the questions fit in one piece of paper, you can't add another. Like that was the organizing principle for what was allowed on and what was not, is how much would fit. And so for a lot of people, digital government means like moving from that piece of paper to a PDF. And maybe if we're lucky, it means moving to a Word document. But in all of that, like you lose all the benefits of the digital. There's no linking. There's no code creating on the document there. There's no common database that we're pulling data from. This is not really digital. It's just paper, looking different. And you can see that in the services that governments offer. So one of my favorite services to make fun of is, next slide, please. No, I don't know if there's like a lag on if it's me. I feel bad. So this website here, this is in my hometown of Vancouver where I grew up, this is the website you go to for food inspections on restaurants. And when you go to this website, my favorite thing about it is you arrive at this website, and the first thing that you see is this, next slide please, is this legal language. And the legal language says, don't use any of the information on this website to make any decisions. No decisions should be made. So you're like, oh yeah, I don't totally know why I'm here anymore, but that's okay. And then if you go deeper into the website, you can search for a restaurant. And then you can find the restaurant, and then it tells you really useful information like the inspection was routine or a follow-up. And you're like, okay, I don't totally know what that means. And if you dig deeper, into the website, I go to the next slide, please. It tells you like exactly what was going on, but none of this information means anything to you. Now, there's two things that I want you to realize about this website. The first is, it's not helping citizens get informed to make any decisions. And the second is, the only time you go to this website is after you've been food poisoned. Right? Because no one's doing this to check the restaurants before they choose them. It's after they get food poisoned when they're like, was I the only one? Like, does this happen before? Like, am I an idiot? And so then you go here and you're like, oh no, I can see that they are really bad. But you have to kind of infer the data. And the crazy part is if we have this data in a digital form, thinking digitally, you can embed this information in like Google Maps or in Yelp, and then people would have this information before they make a decision. And we do that in some places, like New York does a really good job of putting that information, like that little A there, that's a restaurant inspection. And if you see an A, you're like, that's good. If you see a B, you see a C, you probably don't want to go there. So, and we have data that tells us that when people see these signs, they favor restaurants that have A's. And as a result, fewer people end up in the emergency room, fewer people end up sick, you have higher productivity, lower healthcare costs, like real impact if we do it right. But we choose to not do it right in a digital era. We choose to conform to the piece of paper and not think differently about it. And so one of the kind of big conclusions I've had, like looking at examples like this over and over again, next slide please, is first step is we have all the functions wrong. So we have this kind of traditional idea of an IT department, and their job is to keep the servers up and the vendors down and the bad guys out. Really kind of like normal stuff. And then there's all your elected politicians who now increasingly have significantly greater expectations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And so these greater expectations include things like, next slide, please. They want service design, product management, like all of these things. The IT department's like, we've never even heard of those things before. And yet we're putting them on the IT department as though they're somehow supposed to solve them, and not thinking them as more general skills that you want across the entire public service. So if you look kind of, next slide please, if you kind of look across the entire public service, I don't know if there we go, I think you just wait here. I don't know, like when we look across the entire public service, we really are thinking about digital as a public service problem. And the core for this, for me, is I hate the term digital government. If I say the word digital government, you think I'm talking about the future. There is nothing right now that is happening in your government that is not taking place or informed by or influenced by a technology system of some form. There's nothing. Everything is, at some point, is touching a database, it's touching a computer system, it's touching the internet. Pretty much everything everybody is doing in government, it's already digital. There is no digital government. There's only government. It just happens to now be in a digital era. And so, what are you doing about that? How are you thinking about that problem? Do you even know that you are in water? Next slide, please. So, what are the skills that we're going to need in this kind of digital era government? Well, the first is, my big mistake that I fear is that people are trying to train around specific technologies. So they're like, oh, we're going to teach you about AI, or we're going to teach you about the blockchain, or we're going to teach you about open source. This is a huge mistake. What we need to be doing is actually thinking about what are the core skills of public service. Next slide, please. So first is, no, go back one, please. So the first is, are we enabling our governments to iterate and learn at a digital speed? The most important thing is, can we iterate and learn? And then if we can do that correctly, then the question is You know, what are we doing to, like, are we creating, this is the competency. Are we able to understand how to build a learning organization that's leveraging digital skills? This is the competency that, in my view, and the view of my colleagues, every public servant needs to have. And if you can master this competency, then you can start thinking about another set of competencies. Next slide, please. Back one, please. So here you can see, like, do we understand who our users are? Can we design for them? Do we understand how to collect data to ensure our services are effective? And can we do all that in a way that ensures privacy and ensures security? And you as public servants have to have some minimum knowledge about each of these skills in order to be effective. So now we start thinking about competencies like, do we understand who users are and what their experience on web services are? And I say this because 20 years ago, when you delivered a service, citizens came into your office and you delivered to them in person. You can now conceivably run a government where people are receiving their services online and you will never meet a user in your entire career. So we have to take a skill that you kind of was down off the side of your desk of meeting people and talking to them and understanding them, and we have to take that implicit skill and we have to make it explicit in our competencies in government. And it's not just that, it's like things like, can we anticipate privacy and ethical risk of the thing? And you as a senior public leader need to be prepared to ask those questions. And can understand how to use data to inform decisions. These are the kinds of competencies you're going to need that will then allow you to better understand the new technologies that are emerging. But if you just teach the technologies, you're no smarter and you're no better at doing the most important task that you have in front of you, which is how to ask good questions. When I think about senior public leaders in government, like, all they do every day is just meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. If you're a senior public servant, like, your day is just meeting after meeting. You don't work anymore. You just meet people. And the reason you meet people is because people come to you with problems. And the questions you ask them inform them about what is important and what's not important. And so if you don't ask about security, if you don't ask about privacy, if you don't ask about, do we understand what people actually need? Do we know how to design for these people? If you don't ask those questions, people won't try to solve that because they don't think you think it's a problem. So do you, as a senior public servant, understand what questions you're supposed to be asking? That, for me, is the kind of core competency that we need to be focused on. Next slide, please. I want to just confess right now, I teach public administration, I taught for 6 years at Harvard, and at University College London. We have totally failed you as a university sector in doing this. If you look at university courses around the world that teach future public servants, almost none of them have anything about technology in their course. We teach government like it's 1980, not like it's 2020. And so it makes the urgency of figuring out how to do this even more important. And that's why I work with colleagues around the world to build a public syllabus that's open source so that public servants anywhere can figure out how to build these competencies. And we build this by working with faculty all around the world. We convened during the pandemic together. We wrote an open source syllabus. And if you'd like, you can go and download what that syllabus looks like using this QR code. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Or this website. The L did not move back up. I will share this again at the end. Okay, this is for me the new skills we need to be building on. But the other thing I really want you to think about is, what does the new infrastructure look like? And so here's how I want to close out quickly, which is, if you think about how governments look today, next slide please. If you think about how governments look today, next slide please, you can kind of think of them as departments that are kind of doing activities and then storing data. And if you kind of dig in and look at each one of those departments, the disturbing thing is a lot of what they're doing is the same thing. In each department, you have to sign into the service, you have to enter your address, you have to fill out a form, you maybe have to provide some form of unique identifier to say, I'm David Eves. And then each of those departments is storing all of that information on their own. Now, each one may have a unique service, but the reality is a huge amount of the work they have to do in order to get you that service is the same. And so you end up with this enormous amount of duplication. And your citizens are confused as they go to different government websites because like different terms are being used for the same thing, different ways of entering your address. It's deeply confusing and deeply wasteful. And when I look at the leading governments around the world, they're shifting from a model that looks like building these vertical silos over and over again to one of kind of an infrastructure approach. And here they're thinking about, but how can we make it so it's really easy to build new services by leveraging some shared infrastructure that give us access to some common data sets. So when I think about the services at the very top, what I'm talking about here is like how do you get a passport, how do you get a driver's license, how do you get your healthcare benefit. You want these services to be really, really easy to access. And then you want to have a set of core infrastructure like authentication or identity, payments, or a data exchange between different ministries that you're building out that everybody is leveraging, and you're not building over and over and over again. And you want that to be connected to a set of data sources that are like the truth for your government. So do we have a unique identifier for citizens? Do we have a unique identifier for every car in the country? Do we have geospatial data for the entire country that everybody is leveraging? Rather than rebuilding it over and over and over again and paying licenses to vendors over and over again for the exact same service. And if you do that right, you enable enormous flexibility. And so rather than thinking about, oh, we have to be all agile everywhere, you can now you can focus on being agile oriented at the top. So when there's a new government or the environment changes, COVID arrives, we can be very quick and adaptive in updating our services because we actually have these really strong pieces of infrastructure that evolve very slowly but are highly interoperable that serve as a foundation for everything we do. The most interesting work in government that's happening around the world right now is all happening in the global south, where people are only spending $14 per person. This is the model that Singapore uses. This is the model the Indians are using. This is the model the Brazilians are using. When you are looking around the world for what the opportunities are, I don't think you should be looking at North America, and I don't think you should be looking at Western Europe. I think you should be looking at places like India, Bangladesh, Brazil, there's Estonia. There are very, very interesting things going on in those places. And this is because this approach is such an interesting driver for transformation. There's so many different ways you go about doing this. So the Brits, who actually have done quite a good job, they came in and they first decided they were going to tackle their website, so they created gov.uk to make it much easier for people to edit the content on the website and deliver services. They did nothing to make like all the big back-end systems easier to use. It's all a big, big mess. But the front end looked nice and it was much easier for citizens to access. That's a very different approach than what the Estonians did. The Estonians, the Russians left, they took everything, so a little bit greenfield. The Estonians built out those common databases, and the X-Road system is a way to move data all across the government really, really easily, so they're not rebuilding databases in every single ministry. They have single sources of truth everywhere. And the Indians are doing it differently as well. The Indians instead are coming in the middle, and they're building out that shared infrastructure, and they're using that to standardize all the websites and starting to standardize the data underneath it. There's different models that you can leverage this infrastructure. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that are in front of you, and I just want you to look very globally for inspiration, including in places I don't think most of you would think to work. Now, to make all this happen is going to require an incredibly creative bureaucracy, and that's a team sport. So when I think about the work that needs to be happening, you're going to need to get like, how do you get the ministries on board, the IT teams who are all scared and don't know about these like new competencies, the politicians who are demanding everything, and civil society who both want better services but are concerned about privacy and concerned about security. And the reality is your transformation kind of sits right in the middle, that tiny little, like, that's the window for change, right there. You got a thread on. That's how hard your job is. That's how hard your job is. And, you know, the only way you're going to get there is you got to go hug the lawyers, you got to go hug the politicians. You got to hug all these people because you're going to hate them, but you have all got to work together to make this happen. This is the only way it's going to work. So you got to reach across, constantly reaching across. Go find a friendly lawyer. Go find the person in civil society who's willing to talk to you. You got to go build all those relationships. The only way we're going to make this work. So in summary, there's never going to be enough money. I mean, you guys are lucky you're in Europe, but there's still never going to be enough money. You're going to need some new skills, you're going to need some infrastructure, and you're going to have to go build a whole bunch of coalitions to make this work. And I hope this week helps you build skills to go do that. Thanks so much, everyone.